Welcome to this revision video on paper 2, question 2. Before we get started, can I just make sure that you've gone to our Google Classroom and that you've read the two articles that are there for this question from the June 2017 paper. So pause the video now and make sure you've read those texts. Okay, so this is something you should be quite familiar with by now. This is an example question for paper 2, question 2. It's a summary question. So we've got two questions here, and as you'll see, some things change and some things always stay the same. So let's have a look at the things that don't stay the same. So it will always say you need to refer to source A and source B. That gives you your first indication of the marking. This is a question asking you to handle two different sources. So some of the questions will only ask you to look at one. This is asking you to look at two. What follows then is a statement that focuses you in on a small part of both texts. So we can see that here. So on this question from June 2017, which is the one we're looking at today, it's going to ask you to look at the ways the boys spend their time playing as young children and how that is different. The question here from November 2017 says the children at the primary school and the ragged school behave very differently. So both of them are asking you to look at the differences, but the topic of what you're looking at will change depending on the article you're studying. So what you need to do is underline what you are being asked to look at. So here it's very sneaky. There's two parts to this. There's the subject, which is the boys, but what the focus is. This is to do with how they play. So you have to make sure you underline what the topic you are looking at and what particularly you are focusing on, because if you just read look at how the boys are different, you may make some brilliant points, but it won't have anything to do with how they are playing. Okay, so it's very much about the boys playing and the different activities they do. Okay, so I now know that I'm looking to do with things with the boys and I'm looking at how they spend their time playing. So keep that in your mind because you're going to get a chance to answer this in class. So the third bit says, use details from both sources to write a summary of the different activities the boy in source A enjoys and the boy in source B enjoyed when he was young. So it's about things that they enjoy, things that they enjoyed, and it's very much about the boy. So you can't get this wrong as long as you've read the question clearly. So it's telling you what to focus on. The final thing is to be aware of that it's worth 8 marks. That means that you need to spend about 10 to 12 minutes on this question. You will not need extra paper. There'll be more than enough space in the booklet. So they leave you about 3 pages. You won't need that. You'll need a page maximum. So you're not writing loads. You're making 2 good differences and potentially an overall, not anything more than that. Okay, so once you've read the question and you've underlined what the subject and the focus is, you then want to go to your article. So you're going to read it for the first time and you're going to run through and you're going to look for everything that the boy does in source A. So underline all of it, everything that he does. So this is very much a broad brush stroke. You're just looking for everything. And it gives you that sense of a double read through and you can get really familiar with the text, particularly before you head to question 3. It means that you pick the best quotes, the quotes with the highest leverage, the quotes that are going to get you the best marks. So for example, if you just highlight, giddy and silly, you might pick that quote, but that's not actually as good as further down as laughs uncontrollably whenever I say the word teeth. So it's about which is the best quote. So often we find that students, who just pick the first couple of quotes they see and don't look for the highest leverage, they don't get the best marks. So best marks will be awarded to the people who've selected the best quotes that they can make really good inferences from. So already from looking at the screen, you can see there isn't a lot to work with, and that's absolutely fine. There shouldn't be. It's a summary question. It's a quick 8 marker. So you should have gone back to source B and you want to highlight everything there that the boy enjoys doing, the activities that the boy enjoys doing. And then you want to go back to source A because you've got source B fresh in your head, and focusing on the points that are connected or come under a bigger idea. So for instance, both sources refer to the boys making noises or the relationships with adults and how they enjoy contact with their parents. So pick out a few pairs of things that are different. So I've got here, he throws his entire body into barking gibberish, and on the other side I've got the habit of whistling. On the left hand side I've got he rests his head on my shoulder whenever he gets tired. On the right hand side I've got holding his hand with mine. So what that does, I pick out that things are different. So for example here, I can see with the relationship with adults that they both enjoy contact with the adults. But the difference very much is in source A, it's this boy that initiates contact. He is the one that rests his shoulder on the head. Whereas on the other side, he doesn't. He bounds away to school and he's got nimble feet. So, you know, they are holding hands and he does like that contact, but he's really keen to run away. Whereas the boy in source A really much wants to be involved with his parent. Okay, so now I've got some differences and some quotes, I'm ready to look at the mark scheme and what it is I need to do. So like other parts of the mark scheme, there are 3 parts to the question. They're also not equally weighted, so they're worth differing amounts. The first bullet point is about the differences between the 2 texts. The second is about your use of textual detail. And the third is about inferring the meaning from what the text tells us. So the first 2 bullet points are really the 1 to 4 mark range. Can you pick out differences? Can you support those differences with quotes? What's going to get you the higher marks is inferring the meaning. Why that word? What do those words tell us? So we can look here at the principal examiner's report, and that will tell us a lot about what we need to do. So good responses included those where students identified a difference between the activities, selected appropriate textual detail from one text, and inferred some meaning before turning to the other text, selecting another textual detail and inferring something about the difference between both of the texts. Where this approach was repeated with a second difference, students were well rewarded according to the level of details they offered and whether the quality of their comments was an attempt, clear or perceptive. So basically what the examiner is telling us there is that you need to pick out 2 differences between the 2 texts. You need to make some inferences about those differences. So you're effectively being given the higher marks on whether you've attempted to make an inference, you are clear about the inference, or you've been perceptive about it. You've picked up something really, really quite interesting and detailed. Okay, so just a word of warning, the focus of the question is really narrow, the boys and their activities. So you'll need to only look at those things and talk about those things. If you talk about anything else, you won't be awarded marks. So you also need to make sure you're not mentioning language features. You don't need to talk about similes, adjectives, verbs, metaphors, anything like that. You're just picking out information. You're making a statement about what the boys enjoy doing. You're backing it up with a quote. You're talking about what that quotation shows you. You're then comparing that to the other source. Okay, so you will not be marked for language features. Okay, so students aren't really moving past 4 marks on this question, which means you have a bit of work to do to make a clear inference. We're going to look at how you're going to make those clear inferences and what that looks like. So I've got my quotes in response to the June 2000 question above about how the boys are playing. So I've decided that I don't think I'll look at how they seek out their parents, because that's not really to do with playing, so therefore I'm not really answering the question. I'm going to look at how the boy in source B plays loads more with toys and things compared to source A, where the boy seems to rely on human interaction. So I'm going to follow the guidance from the examiner's report, and I'm going to start with a difference, a quote, I'm going to make some inferences, I'm then going to contrast, more quotes, more inference. So that's the structure I'm going to follow. So I like to call it SQI, compare, SQI. All right. So this is my answer. All right, so it should start with a statement. So let's see if we can spot that. In source A, the boy seems to enjoy making a lot of noise. as he throws his entire body into barking gibberish. So there I've got my statement, the boy seems to enjoy making a lot of noise, and my quotation, he throws his entire body. What should happen next is I should make an inference, and we can see that inference from the word suggests. So in source A, the boy seems to enjoy making a lot of noise as he throws his entire body into barking gibberish, which suggests that he's so enthusiastic about this shouting that he does it wholeheartedly and without any reserve or hesitation. Now, what some of you guys have done in the past is that you've then carried on talking about source A. Once you've made that inference, you're not talking about an individual word or phrase, you are heading straight to source B. And we can see that connection there between the connective however, and however shows that I'm looking at a difference. So however, in source B, while the boy also seemed to enjoy making noise as a child, as he had a habit of whistling, and his mother mentions a number of noisy toys or behaviour, such as pop guns, a hearty shout and a shrill whistle, the crack of whips, it seems that he has a wider range of noises. Also, it may be that the barking gibberish is related more to the fact that the younger child in source A is tired rather than actually enjoying it. It could be frustration rather than pleasure which is causing this behaviour. So what I've done there is I've made a really clear comparison about the noises, but I've made a high level inference. My high level inference is that the boy in source A is younger and therefore he's actually quite tired, which is why he's barking gibberish, and it's not necessarily about pleasure, whereas the boy in source B very much seems to enjoy making those noises through the range of toys that he's got. So that is going to be a top band response. However, the examiner clearly said I needed to do that again. So I'm looking at making 2 good paragraphs, okay? 2 good comparisons of differences before I finish my answer and move on to question 3. Okay, so this is the formula that I followed, and I call it SQI. So this is what SQI effectively is. So in source A, you're going to talk about the subject and the focus on the question and make a point followed by the quote. Okay, so S, you're making a statement about the quote followed by a quote. B, I then explain that quote and I made an inference about what it means and suggests, and then I contrast that with source B, again, using the subject and focus on the question, the boys and the activities, and I made another point followed by my second quote. I then explained that quote, I made an inference about what it means to suggest, and then said how it's different to source A. I then added an also and took it a little bit further to get that perceptive comment. So effectively, you're making a point, you're backing it up with a quote, you're explaining the quote, you're contrasting it, you're making another point, quote, you're talking about that quote and talk about how it's different to A, and if you can you make a really perceptive inference? Okay, so finally, just before we end today's video, I just want you to think about how the examiner knows that you're making an inference, and it's from these phrases. So it's when you're looking at the quote and then going, this quote gives the impression that, this quote indicates that, this quote the writer hints at, this quote the writer purposely points out these things. So if you're using phrases like that, you are making an inference, and that should at least put you into band 5. Okay, so what I want you to do is make sure you've revised this clearly, make sure you've read the sources, and then you can have a go at practicing the answer.